Hey everybody! Welcome to my channel, The Magical Solution, here on Facebook, YouTube, I think Twitch, because I just started using that like 5 minutes ago, and I think Instagram Live. I don't know what a stream key is. Hopefully I did it right. And I'm so excited about tonight, you guys. Like, I'm so freaking excited, and I hope you guys are too, because tonight I'm interviewing an up-and-coming author. Already is getting big waves in the community. Lots of people talking about his new book, American Brujeria. His name is J. Allen Cross, and I'm just like stoked. So before we bring him in, let's read his bio. Let's get to know him just a smidgen, okay? Here we go. J. Allen Cross is a practicing witch of Mexican, Native American, and European descent, whose craft was shaped by his Catholic upbringing and mixed family culture. Living in his home state of Oregon, he works as a psychic medium and occult specialist for a well-known paranormal investigation team out of the Portland metro area. When he's not investigating, he enjoys providing spells and potions to his local community, exploring haunted and abandoned places, and working as a consultant for other workers and investigators, and of course, writing about witchcraft. Make sure you follow him on Instagram and pretty much all social media sites at Oregon Wood Witch. Okay, so without further ado, you guys, here we go.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here.
Hey, how are you? Thank you so much for coming onto my show. I know for a fact you've probably been super busy now that your new book is out and everyone just wants to get a piece of you. So like, thank you for coming on my show.
I am so happy to be here. I love getting out. You know, we are kind of coming off of the tail end of COVID here. I've been vaccinated. I'm returning to the streets to reclaim my time. I'm in a great mood these days.
We need that, man. That is so great to hear. Spread the love, spread that energy. I think we need to give it to more people, man, for real.
Happiness. It's been in short supply.
So let's talk about this. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about you first, for really reals. Like, who is J. Allen Cross? Like, who are you?
Who am I?
What's your story? What's your background? What brought you to this point? Let's hear it all. So I was born. No.
Exactly. I was born on a cold day in April. No. Yeah, so to be honest, I often joke that I am kind of just holding on to the bumper of spirit. It just kind of takes me wherever it wants me to go. And I have very little say in the matter, but spirit has decided to kind of put me here, so I'm grateful for that. But I grew up in a little town in Northeast Oregon, and that is where it kind of all began. Grew up Mexican Catholic, with a magical family. I don't come from a line of people who practice a specific form of magic, but we are all very kind of in tune. My grandmother was a visionary who used to speak to God, and according to her, he would speak to her as well. So she would get her psychic information that way, and she would basically just say, the Heavenly Father is telling me to do this or that. I was raised by a single mother who would read tarot cards at the dinner table some nights for her friends. And the magic has always kind of been there. And so I started this at a really young age because I was already having the psychic experiences, and then the magic started to happen as well. And so my journey into learning an actual magical tradition it started very early because I was mostly trying to make sense of what was happening to me. I needed vocabulary for it. I needed skills around it. So like most people starting in the late 90s, early 2000s, I had Wicca, and that was about it. So that's kind of where it began. And then from there, I branched out, learned several different types of magic, different types of witchcraft. And then many years ago, I really fell in love with folk magic. And as kind of the rest of us are being called to our ancestral magic, I felt similarly called as well. And something that a lot of people experience, especially when it comes to what I call American Brujeria, is it just kind of finds its way to you. You just kind of wake up one morning and you have a Guadalupe statue and like your ancestor altar and some saints, and you're like, how did this get here? But it just kind of shows up a little bit, and that's how it sort of found me. And so one day I kind of just realized it was something I was doing. So that was kind of how I ended up here.
You know, your background story is interesting because I feel it is the background story of so many young and upcoming spiritual practitioners. Because, you know, the old school practitioners, and maybe I'm aging myself, I'm dating myself, because I'm definitely from like the late 80s, early 90s, and you know, back then and even now, everyone speaks about receipts. You know, who are you initiated by? Where did you get your learning from? Where did And I'm seeing a whole new school of individuals that are saying, fuck that. It's about gnosis. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you're being divinely connected, and you're just people. I mean, the youth are coming in just knowing shit. And like I feel like you're definitely one of those like younger pioneers in that world that's saying, you know what, I'm not afraid to say that. You know, like I grew up in this family. Yeah, I didn't get taught all these fancy things. I just knew certain things, and I just experienced things, and I just listened to my higher self and my spirit, and I just followed it. And that, to me, that's so admirable, and I think it's so relatable to the youth that are out here today. So for you to talk about it like this, I actually hope you write more about that, because that's fascinating, for really real. Um, what is more about this idea of American Brujeria? Like you mentioned this when you were talking about it. What is the difference? Like, what is American Brujeria?
So it's kind of this funny thing that I realize that I share in common with a lot of people who are either Mexican American or some sort of other Latino American, you know, Puerto Rican American, Cuban American. A lot of people, we share very similar types of working. And we, as Mexican Americans, or anyone who is really kind of a blend of two cultures, creates kind of an island unto themselves. Because we as Mexican Americans, like, you know, we go over to the Americans and hang out, and they're like, wow, you're like so Mexican. But then you go and hang out with the people who like just moved here from Mexico, and they're like, what are you talking about? You're not a Mexican. So we end up kind of being like in the middle, kind of by ourselves here. And then whenever we have a demographic that's kind of isolated in that way, we will find kind of unique things come out of them. One of which is something that I'm calling American Brujeria, which is so I have to kind of start off with kind of like traditional brujeria, which is very different from what I'm talking about. And in places like Mexico, we don't use words like witchcraft as an umbrella term for everything magical under the sun. In the United States, we use the term witchcraft for Wicca and for herbalism and Reiki, and like all this stuff falls under witchcraft. But that's not exactly how it works in a place like Mexico, where brujeria is a very specific type of magic, or a specific path of magic, kind of like how Wicca is not representative of all witchcraft. It's kind of has a division like that. Well, we also have many other different forms. We also have hechiceria. We also have curanderismo. We have magia. We have all this stuff. And this is stuff that kind of floats around in our culture. Magic is just very much ingrained in the everyday life of Mexican people. And this is something that they really lean on. And so when people immigrate to the United States, they have these beliefs with them, and they carry them with them, this knowledge about the spirit world and about saints and about how to work with them, and these spells. They bring it with them, and then once they get to the United States, they kind of pile it up into a big old pile here and then pass it down to us. And so those of us who are, you know, like several generation American, or you know, have had, you know, people in their family come over and then pass this down to them, you kind of inherit this mixed bag of stuff to work with, which is unusual. It's kind of like they took all the paths and kind of took the most important parts of them and then brought them here into the United States, and then was like, here you go. And then
everyone's mixed bag is different.
Exactly, because each family mixes it a little different. So it's a very diverse practice. And then once we get to the United States, too, then we have trade with other types of folk magic as well that are already here. So things like Southern Conjure, powwow, all these things are already here, and these are things we have a lot of crossover with, and therefore we have a lot of sharing that kind of goes on between them. So I started realizing that I had a very specific type of way of working with this magic, and I started realizing that those around me who were also Mexican American had the same kind of way of working. And that's when it started cluing me in that I'm like, oh, okay, this is something specific to us. And then when you ask Mexican American people, like, okay, what is this called? They'll tell you, like, oh, this is brujeria. It's a very it's very offhanded, like, yeah, that's what this is. This is, our Latinx folk magic of some sort. But I wanted to make sure that if I was going to write a book about it and kind of put it out there, that I wasn't at the same time erasing, traditional brujeria by just saying, oh, this is what that is, because they're not the same thing. So I wanted to really make sure that I was defining where the borders were, and that's why I kind of coined the term American Brujeria and decided to write about it as such. So that's kind of how it ended up getting there.
So for those of you who are new to this chat, new to this channel, new to J. Allen Cross, what he's talking about is his book, American Brujeria. So let me put it up here for you guys so that you can see it and you can go buy it. Here it is. And this book is great. I ate it up immediately as soon as I got it. Ate it all up. It's a very, very easy read. It covers just a little bit of everything you can think of within that mixed bag that Jay was talking about. And it's his personal mixed bag, and it's his perspective of what was handed to him and how he can work with it all. And I think that, to get some insight and to really get started in at least the view of what he's talking about here, what you're saying about Puerto Rican Americans, Mexican Americans, Cuban Americans, and what we have to struggle with, kind of being in that in-between world and carrying our own little mixed bag over our shoulder. This kind of gives you just a taste of what it is that we go through and what it is that we work with. So definitely pick up this book. And I want to talk more about this book. I want to talk about what your inspiration was for this. Like I know that you were definitely trying to not erase your traditional brujeria and bring in sort of that American aspect, but what was your ultimate goal? What was your inspiration? What is the impact that you want to leave for the people who are reading this book?
Absolutely. So it was kind of twofold. I at first wanted, I realized that there was a big gap in kind of magical texts as far as things that were Mexican practices, but also written in English, which is something that we don't find a lot, and also written by somebody who understands the culture, or is part of the community. That's something that we really haven't had before. At the same time, though, I wanted to make sure to really kind of stay in my lane. I'm not from Mexico. I'm from the United States. I wanted to make sure that that was something that was very clear. And at the same time, I really wanted to spotlight Mexican American people, because I feel like we often feel very invisible because of this kind of in-between state. We often feel very alone. We often feel like we're the only ones that are kind of stuck in between. And I wanted to flip the script on that a bit. I wanted to make that into something that wasn't so much a lonely thing, but something that, I wanted to make them feel understood and feel seen, but also make them feel powerful. Those of us who are in between, that we are mixed race, we are a liminal space. And this is something that I go into in the book, where we are like a crossroads, where we are two things at once. We are both Mexican and we are American. And when you are two things at once, you are both and you are neither at the same time. It's a paradox. And in magic, the idea of a liminal space where two things meet, like a crossroads, these are supposed to be very powerful spiritual places where we can interact with spirits and conjure great forces at these places. So that's why we go to a crossroads for magic, or why we go cast magic at midnight, which is also a liminal space because it is in between 2 days. Same things like sunrise and sunset, dawn and twilight. These are also liminal spaces. And so I wanted to really draw attention to this fact that even though we might feel a little isolated or a little kind of stuck as people of mixed race, there's enormous power in that. And not even just magical power, but cultural power. We are bridge people between, Mexican people and American people. And we need to stop seeing ourselves as being kind of rejected and more celebrate ourselves as being people who have this ability to connect to worlds and hopefully at some point facilitate healing within that, I think is important.
Oh my God, I love that. I love this concept of bridge people. Love that because it starts with just bridging your traditional culture with the culture that you grew up in. And that's a ancestral type of healing in and of itself, because you're going back, you're going back in time and you're healing wounds for your ancestors. But then it also connects you to the future. It connects you to the bridges of the world. I mean, let's not forget, this is the age of technology. This is the age of the internet. And like, you taking those steps of bridging the gap between who your ancestors are and who you are is that first step in bridging the gap between who America is and who Europe is, who America is and who China is, and like really making those connections the way we should. That's admirable, and I do hope that that's something that people get from this book and people take away from it. I think that's really important. What kind of research and preparation did you put into this book? Like, what were the steps that it took? I've always wanted to write my own book, but it's like the thought of it is so intimidating. So I'm just wondering what you went through to get through to this.
Oh gosh, well, I've been doing magic for a really long time, so it was something that, I understood the process, and I had been doing this type of work for several years at this point. But by the time I kind of decided that I may or may not want to write a book like this, so I had already been kind of working in it. But then once the book idea came through, then I realized I'm like, okay, so yes, this is something that I have experience in, this is something I have knowledge in, but this is also just my experience. And so I knew that if I was going to go out there and kind of be the voice of my community, it couldn't just be my voice. It needed to be the voice of my community. And so I began taking classes from other Mexican American people who do this type of work. I began taking classes from them. I took classes from curanderas. I also, the best part of the research was I began to furiously call everyone I knew who was Mexican American, started interviewing random people. My mother actually works in a Mexican restaurant, and so I would go there and I would speak with the waitresses and the bussers and the cooks, and I would talk with them. And what was so funny was this type of work is so ingrained into our culture that we don't think of it as being weird or magic. It's just what you do. And so I would sit down with people, or I'd get them on the phone, and I'd be like, okay, so the reason why I wanted to talk with you and interview you is because I'm writing this book on Mexican American folk magic. And they'd be like, whoa, you've got the wrong person. I am not a brujo. I don't do any of that stuff. Like, you got the wrong guy.
But do you pray to the saints, though?
Right, exactly. I'm like, wait. I'm like, let's just see if you don't do any of this stuff.
You make healing soups when people are sick.
Right? Have you ever slept over somebody's feet and freaked out? Like, these are things that people just don't think about. And so I found that there was kind of two different ways to kind of break into it. I'd either ask them, like, have you ever seen a ghost or had an experience with a ghost? That would normally be kind of like a good way to kind of go into it, because a lot of them have. We as Latinx people really experience the spirit world very intensely, more so than a lot of people that I feel that we're surrounded by a lot of times. I find that when I talk to other Mexican American people, they're more likely to have ghost stories than really anyone else around me at that point. So that was a good way to go into it. The other way that was really hilarious is I would just start real casually and be like, so does your family ever use Vicks Vapor Rub? And they'd be like, well, yeah, like, absolutely. And start telling me about it. And I'd be like, yeah. So like, tell me, how your family would use it. And I just, people would be like, well, yeah, so my mom used to get like the Vicks, and then she would mix it with salt and like saliva, and then like apply it in the sign of the cross, and then they'd go, oh. that's magic. And I'd be like, yes, it is. That is exactly what that is. And then other ones would come through. They'd be like, so like when you put the red ribbon on like a baby's wrist to protect it from the ojo, and I'm like,
Yes.
and then like all this stuff like started coming through, and then they had just like stuff I had never heard of too that came out, that like talking about like red string on the forehead to stop hiccups, and like all all kinds of stuff. And so this was stuff that had been passed down to these people from their aunts and their grandmothers and their uncles and their grandfathers, that had been teaching them. So I got to hear their stories about that, learn the ways that their families went about it. And it's so amazing because everyone's family does it a bit different. And I talk about this a little bit in the book, where I'm like, tradition is powerful. So if you're reading a section in my book and you go, that's not the way that my family does it, then defer to the way that your family does it, because that's really important. Because when you do it the way that your family does it, then you're not alone. They are there with you. When you do it when you pray the way, or however, the way that your grandma taught you, then it's her doing it with you. And her mother who taught her, and her mother's father who taught her. And like, they're all there with you. This is a very important part, this family tradition. And of course, whenever I bring that up, someone always goes, well, what if I don't have family tradition? And that's wonderful, because family tradition can start with you. You can be the first one and then pass it down. And then that way, when your children or your grandchildren or your nieces and nephews do it the way that you taught them, then you are there with them. And that's powerful, and that's important.
Yes, exactly. One of the biggest pieces of working with, and you speak a little bit about this also too, you have a small chapter on ancestor veneration. And it is exactly that. First of all, living your best life, but practicing in the way that they practice, right? Praying in the way that they prayed, working with the energies that they work with. And this is how we can differ from a lot of what is called neo-pagan reconstructionist religions out here. Because the idea of reconstructionist religions is the idea of that at some point there was a broken gap. There was a gap where people forgot about this, and then it got picked up again, and now we have to pick up the pieces using archaeology, using mythology, using those pieces to put it all together, versus folk magic and lineage kinds of traditions that are unbroken chains. Now, although the awareness may not be there, so you may have Mexican Americans talking about, oh, this isn't magic, this is what I do. That still matters. It matters because it's an unbroken line of this is what you've been doing, what your grandma been doing, what her grandma been doing all the way. And so it is an unbroken chain of folk magic that is just part of our lives. And that's not just Mexican American, that's Puerto Rican American, that's Cuban American, that's Brazilian American. It's all of it. That's just all of us on this hemisphere, on this side of the world, Turtle Island, South America, Mexico, all of it. We are family, and this is what it is that we do. And you're right, like our ability to see the spirit world and interact with the spirit world, our lands are so magical. Our lands, I mean, take a trip to Mexico, take a trip to Brazil, take a trip to the Caribbean islands. You feel like you are in another freaking world. And it's not because it's just beautiful. There's an energy there.
Absolutely.
You got islands in the Caribbean. I'm sorry, but you got islands that be having hurricanes just completely missing the island, just right. going right around it, and they be like, "What's going? That island did not get hit at all." Yeah. So things like that. It's just we're a special people, and I think that you highlight that quite well here. And some of so you brought up the Vicks. When I saw this in your book, dude, I lost my shit. I was like,
yes! I'm so excited about that.
I'm sitting here thinking, I can't wait for someone to talk about Vicks, brown Listerine, and Pine Sol. If y'all can talk about these three things, I will be so happy. And look at you, all up in here talking about it. So let's kind of delve into some of these chapters. Like, what was one of your favorite chapters to write? Why?
It's kind of split between two, because of course I love the section on Vicks Vapor Rub. That was something that I knew going into this that I had to put in. And it's funny because it is funny. It's hilarious, this idea. And it's dedicated, the section is dedicated to my grandma Lena, my great grandma Lena. And she was wild. she was known for a great many things, one of which was if someone was on her lawn, she would run out of the house with a carving knife, screaming in Spanish for them to get off of her lawn. She was not messing around. My great grandma Lena was here to take out the trash. And the other thing she was really well known for was her deep and undying love of Vicks Vapor Rub to cure everything, absolutely everything. You have a headache, she would put it on your head. You have a stomach ache, she put it on your stomach. If you were having trouble sleeping, she would put it on your eyelids. Now, I do not recommend that. That's not a good day. Don't do that. But she turned to it for everything, and this is not an unusual story.
No.
This is something that's very common among us, that we all have these very visceral memories of Vicks Vapor Rub being so important in
The
our
menthol smell is
right?
everything.
And
Is
that
everything.
smell, it comes from very important plant allies. It comes from camphor and eucalyptus, which are really, really well-known plants in our world. And these are used for healing and for protection and for removing evil and purifying and cleansing. All of these things. It's like everything good comes from camphor and eucalyptus. And so to find it in like a pot just like this ready to go is amazing. And when you look at the Vicks like ads from like way back when, because Vicks is something like almost 150 years old, or maybe
Yeah.
if you look at the old ones, they market it as being kind of magical. It's a little bit like Florida water, the way that they talk about it, that it's there kind of like this mystical thing. And so we really remember that. We remember that time, and we bring it forth with us. One of the best stories that I get a lot is people who remember. Now, this doesn't really happen with our generation, but people remember their grandparents and their great grandparents that would eat it, like straight up, just like spoon it or like put it in their tea or their coffee. And I'm like, that is hardcore. That is really intense.
You are committed.
Yeah, I'm like, that's bravo for that one, because it definitely says on the box, do not do that. But this was kind of the intensity of the faith in it that people had. And so I knew that I had to incorporate it. And so I have a whole section in the book that is spells incorporating Vicks Vapor Rub. I do road opening and cleansing and all kinds of things with it, just to give people a little inspiration for something that they've seen, so many times, and just to help people to embrace something that we all have in our cupboards. But beyond the Vicks Vapor Rub, I really have a deep love of the chapter on limpias, where we are doing the cleansing and the healing. I think that's just really beautiful work, and it has just really pure intention. It's here to help. It is here to try and fix things, and it's something that a lot of us can do. And that's kind of one of the things that makes American Brujeria kind of unique, is that in Mexico we have curanderos and curanderas that can help us. But once we get to the United States, they do exist here, but they're few and far between. And the few that you can find sometimes are not legit, or
suspect,
things like that. So we had to learn to do it ourselves without a curandero or a curandera. And so that was really important for me to have that chapter in there, to really keep that work alive as we move forward.
And it's interesting, because I definitely want to touch on these two chapters. It's interesting because and I don't want to use the word Hispanic, but the whole Latinx kind of hemisphere, we very much pride ourselves on being not purist, if you will, but very clean and cleanly. Like I remember my great-grandmother and my grandmother always saying, cleanliness is second only to holiness. If you want to reach God, you need to be clean. And it's this very puristic kind of stuff. And a lot of people attribute that to the, Catholicism and to the Christianity that was brought in. But we've had that long before. I remember, having discussions about ancestors I'm Puerto Rican, so my Taino ancestors, it was very much about bathing in the waterfalls, cleaning in the oceans and the rivers, constantly. Hygiene was like such a thing for us. Yeah, we were butt naked walking around with some jewelry, but we were so prim and proper and clean. And I think that's just a beautiful thing to sort of keep going. And you see this across a lot of Latinx traditions, this idea of limpias and waters and fumigation, the smoke cleansings and all the ways in which we can make our spirit clean to make us connected to God. So yes, the chapters on that were amazing. Now the Vicks thing, just to go back to it for a second, you brought up this idea of Florida water. And, there was like this, I remember there was this whole controversy around whether or not Florida water was open or closed, practice, blah, 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 bull crap, right? And I remember saying to myself, while I'm watching all of this happen, is things like Florida water, things like Vicks Vapor Rub, things like Pine Sol and Fabulosa, things like, these products that were never really made to be magical became magical because we were the magical ones that adopted that, assimilated that, took that, and made something. We looked at these ingredients and go, oh, these are the same ingredients I use in my limpias. Right? Okay, so this is like a one and all catch all bottle. Okay, cool. And
we already know how to drive it.
We already know how to drive the tool. The tool was made for a toiletry, or it was made to clean your floor, but we said no. And that, I think that's what makes us survivors, us, our African brothers and sisters. The fact that we've been through so much, we've suffered so much, the slave trade, all of it, and we are still here, is because we saw the tools and we knew how to freaking drive the tools in order for us to survive. They gave them the hogs, they gave them the pig's feet, they gave us the worst lands, and we still planted crops. They still made the best cuisines. Like, that's just our nature. That's who we are. So, like, again, to see someone's mixed backpack, out there on paper, you get a taste of someone's tradition. And I really encourage anyone else who's Puerto Rican American, Cuban American, all the different Latinx Americans to come out here and do your own American Brujeria version, if you will, and talk about it. You also incorporate a lot of Catholicism. Now that is just, again, that's who we are. Like, you talk about a Latinx, you cannot separate Catholicism from the Latina. You just can't. It's there. And you have a lot of it in here. Everything from working with the rosary to working with the Bible to, just everything in here. So can you talk a little bit more on that and why you decided to do that? Because I guess I'm asking because if you're a newcomer, reading someone's story and you're like, oh, I want to do brujeria, right? But you also just like came from a very toxic Christian family. And then you see all of this Catholic saint stuff and rosaries. Like, how do you get past that? How do you help the reader to look past that and understand this?
That is a fabulous question. I love this question because when people have that moment where they come up against Catholicism and then like have this immediate rejection of it, it's because when they see Catholicism, they see the institution, they see the Pope, they see the priests with the sex scandals, they see all of this stuff. And we have to remember that when it comes to this work and any type of magic that we're doing that involves Catholicism, we're not talking about Catholicism the way that they want us to do it. We are talking about folk Catholicism, which does not care what the Pope has to say, what the institution has to say. In fact, a lot of the times the Catholic Church, capital T, capital C, the Church, is very upset by our version of Catholicism. So I just want to throw that out there, that this has nothing to do with being a good Catholic. This is using Catholicism in magic. Now, that being said,
driving the tools.
Exactly, driving the tools. That being said, though, a lot of us come from families that are believers, deep believers in Christ and the Holy Spirit, and they go to church. And I mean, my grandmother was that way. I know this is a very common thing for all of our abuelas to be in the Catholic Church every day, praying the rosary, just loving Jesus. And what's important is to understand the history and to know that Catholicism being brought to us was not a good thing. It was not something that went well. It was not something that was good for our people. Colonization was a terrible, terrible event. However, when it comes to the magic that we are practicing today, this is the magic that was given to us by our grandmothers. And our grandmothers often were Catholic, and that is how they understood the magic, and that's how they worked the magic. And that was their kind of doorway into that world, was through Catholicism. And so while it's important to understand the idea of colonization and the history of it, we also can't turn our backs on our grandmothers and our great grandmothers and what they believed and what was important to them. And plus, there's no greater act of rebellion than taking colonizer religion and turning it into badass magic to like fight back with. Like that is
Yes.
so important to be able to do, to turn that on them and be like, look, you sent this to us and now we are going to use it to our advantage and make it one of our most powerful tools. I think that that is a really important way for us to sort of undo some of it, or at least heal it, or at least kind of feel better about it. If you're going to twist somebody something up real good, it might as well be Catholicism, might as well make it weird and witchy. So I highly encourage it.
Love it. Speaking of them looking at us as not being the best Catholics and not always agreeing with how we do things, let's talk about Santa Muerte. Let's talk about it. You
Let's
got a
do
nice
it.
little chapter in here. You talk about her in here. I've done a live on that subject as well. I think it's something that is so captivating to the audience. People are absolutely enamored by her. They want to just know about her, eat her all up. What's your take? How do you portray her in this book? What's your take of Santa Muerte?
So my chapter on La Santa Muerte is the one that people are divided on the most. I have I have people who have been lifelong devotees that are sending me messages thanking me, like, thank you for setting the record straight and for, letting people know what the real truth is. And then again, I have had people dedicate their entire social media platforms to hating me. So it's really kind of a mixed bag because everyone is going to have different experiences with her. So kind of my journey with her, I am not a devotee, but I wanted to be at one point. About 3-4 years ago, I decided I wanted to be a devotee. And so I immediately started to do research. I began to read books, and I began to talk to other devotees who had worked with her for a really long time. And then as the years kind of went on, I didn't really kind of feel comfortable yet. Like I didn't feel like I knew enough. And then once we were approaching the book too, the research then ramped up again as well, because so this had been 3-4 years of me researching La Santa Muerte. So people think I just woke up one morning and decided to write this chapter. That's not. So I've taken classes from devotees. I've spoken to devotees, both the ones from Mexico and the ones from America. I have spoke to former devotees, and I have spoken with Mexican people who have had interactions with her. So I have had a lot of Santa Muerte background. And I realized that she has two very distinct sides. There is one side that is very loving and very kind and very generous. But we also have to remember, at the end of the day, La Santa Muerte is death. She is death, and that is not a metaphor. That is what she is. And I think that that's really important for people to grasp first and foremost, that when they call upon her, they are calling upon death, which is really important. So talking about the two sides of her, while some people had really beautiful, loving connections with her, the majority of the stories that I was told, first-hand stories, were not fuzzy, cuddly, loving mother vibes.
Yeah.
And I started realizing too that a lot of times people would meet this kind of wrathful, vengeful side of her when they were not respecting her, when they were treating her like an ATM, when they were treating her like a prop for their aesthetic or for their Instagram, and just asking for things and not paying her or building a relationship with her. People approach her like an ATM, and I think that that's very dangerous, because when they do that, she will correct you. And that is something that people forget about, because in this day and age, especially in the United States, we like our spirituality to be marketable. We
Yes.
like it to be able to bring us followers and money and things like that. And it's way easier to get those things if you say, oh, follow me. La Santa Muerte is never going to do anything that would be bad or hurtful to you. Come follow me, all this stuff. She's just nothing but a loving mother. Then you get more followers and you get money, you get people into your classes, things like that. So people have really, really tried to take away kind of her wrathful side in order to market this very loving image of her, which I understand that there's kind of a need to do that, but we also need to be aware and honest of the realities. And so what my chapter was trying to be very honest about what the spirit is like, what it might mean for you if you call upon death and ask it to come into your home, and making sure that people are aware that she has this other side. Because when people stop being aware of this wrathful side, then they stop respecting her. And then she becomes
Facts.
a prop. Then she becomes a prop. Then she becomes a money-making tool. Then she becomes their sugar mama or whatever. And then we have books out right now that say that, oh, she's a party girl, and all kinds of things. And I'm like, oh, can we not? We need to bring the respect back. We need to have a healthy level of understanding of what this is. So that was the bulk of my chapter.
You know, it's funny because I feel like overall, just magical practices overall tend to go through that every I mean, it's getting worse. I feel like it's getting worse. But this idea of sort of only showing the love and light aspect of it and only showing the good side of it to get these likes and to get these followers and to get these clients. And it's really it does a lot more damage than good. You know, I I find it very remiss when I see people who completely avoid anything uncomfortable in the spiritual world or anything that might remind them of death or cursing or whatever. And, you know, when you see that, what ends up happening, people get themselves into trouble. And who do they look for? People like you and me to come fix
Exactly.
it. You know, because we, you know, again, it's where we understand the balance. We understand what we're calling on. And so, you know, when you ignore one side, yeah, man. And that goes with spirits, that goes with saints. That
Mm-hmm.
goes because saints also have. I just did a live with my boy Dominic about suspect saints. There are saints that are they got some stuff going on, and you can't ignore that about them just because they're saintly, you know? So I think like for you to bring that up, I think that's very, very helpful. It's showing a real side that you can't just ignore. You really, really can't. One of the things that you mentioned when you were prepping for this book was that you got an opportunity to, you know, interview people and talk with grandmamas and talk with people in the restaurants and not to jump all over the place, but I kind of wanted to talk about that again because there was something so endearing about your explanation about that because so much of our youth forget to talk to their grandma who's sitting in the couch watching TV right now. You know what I mean? Like she's there. She is a wealth of information. Your grandfather who's out on the porch smoking a cigar, a wealth, a lifetime of information that's right there at the tips of your fingers. And no, we're not taking advantage of that. And here you are interviewing other people's grandmamas and interviewing other people's grandfathers because you want that information. And it's not just to write a book, but you're also enriching your own spiritual journey. Like now their folk magic has been integrated into your folk magic. And you've added something to that little mixed backpack that you've been carrying around your whole life. You now have more to add to it. And I think that, you know, not to just overly talk over you because obviously you're the one being interviewed, but I just feel like what you are explaining is just so helpful to the Latinx community that we have. You know, we're not taking advantage of it. We're not. So I definitely praise you on that. I hope you talk about that more, you know, in your social media, just about taking advantage of our ancestors and talking with our elders, not sending them off to nursing homes and not doing and just talking to them, you know? So thank you for that. For really reals.
Yeah, it was such a beautiful experience. And to be honest, I thought I knew stuff before I started talking to these people. And magic is always the more you learn, the less you know. And I thought I was so smart. And then I started talking to these people and just had my world rocked, my mind open, just like them telling these stories. And it wasn't even just like stories about, oh, you know, you put this on here and then this thing happens. It was stories about like, someone told me the story once about when they were running from the police and Guadalupe showed up and gave them directions. Somebody told me the story about that was told to them by their father about seeing El Cucuy once. All kinds of really interesting tales. And a lot of them too had stories of seeing brujas turn into things or having them fly. And people would just deadpan look at you and be like, no, I saw a person lift off the ground.
Yep.
Like,
dead ass.
And they're serious about it.
Yep.
And I believe them because in places like still alive and well. And I think simply that geographic location surrounded by people who are believers in it, I think other things are possible. Like people talk about watching them turn into owls or fly or any of these things. I think the world is a weird place.
Yes. You said it. So, Jay, are you working on anything new? Are there any upcoming projects? I mean, this literally came out 5 minutes ago, so you definitely got to let this marinate on the population. But like, is there anything else? Any classes? Any other books? Any other vlogs or workshops, or maybe other interviews you want to tell people about?
Yeah. So I can't say much yet about next books, but do expect to hear from me again. Um, and I do have stuff going on. I do hold workshops at least once a month, always on a different topic. Sometimes we're talking about saints. I taught one earlier today that was on building wards for your house to protect it. So I do a lot of those there, and you can find those through my Instagram. My Instagram is, of course, at Oregon Woodwitch, and that's where I kind of advertise those. I am planning on in the next, I'm hoping in mid-June to launch American Brujeria as a course.
Right.
Using the book and kind of going deeper into it beyond what's just in the book, kind of talking about the mechanics of it and how these things work. And so you can see kind of firsthand me walking you through it and answering your questions and all kinds of stuff. So I am hoping to have that come out soon. And otherwise, I'm just constantly rocking and rolling, trying to do new things. I do have a podcast. I keep forgetting I have a podcast.
Yes.
It is called Invoking Witchcraft. You can find it pretty much everywhere podcasts are found. We are on Spotify. I run it with a good friend of mine who is named Britton Boyd, and they are amazing. We are two just dirty folk witches, just living that folk magic life, and that's what the podcast is about. We are an educational podcast, so we try and kind of we have episodes on foundational skills, on protecting your home, on getting rid of hexes, on doing hexes, all kinds of stuff. So it's all out there.
That's awesome. I just put it into the chat so that everyone can get the name of that. How about some contact information, email, screen name? Where can people find you if they want to chit chat with you?
Absolutely. The best way to go is just to contact me through Instagram, either through DM, and if you send me a DM, give me a few days to respond because I get a lot of them rolling in, but I do go through them eventually. But on my Instagram, there's a link in my bio. It will take you to my Etsy store where you can purchase the products. You can book services through there. So I do tarot readings, I do spells, I do consultations, I do all kinds of stuff. And you can book right through there. It will also take you to my Patheos column where I occasionally write blog articles about all kinds of stuff from in-depth looks at what is American Brujeria to paranormal investigation articles and
Nice.
kind of popular witch culture, what's going on right now sorts of articles. So you can find all of that through my Instagram.
Awesome. Jay Allen, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. We covered a lot considering we were 10 minutes short, but we covered so much. Was there anything else you wanted to add before I let you go? Because I feel like we did everything.
I like to kind of end these by simply sending out a message to anyone out there who is of mixed race and has felt isolated or alone or sort of rejected by both of your sides. You are a whole person. You are not alone. There are many, many of us, and you are beautiful, and you are here to heal the world. And so no matter what you are mixed with, just know that you are very special, and we love you.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Alan. And thank all of you guys for coming. Let's say hello to a couple of people in the chat I see here. We have Marius, we have Tandy, we have Melissa, we have Marisolas, we have Maria, we have Sonia, Justin. Oh my goodness, so many. I'm not sure. Is the Siren Dihome? I think I'm saying that right. Let's see who else. Ilana, Val, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. I am Leilani. This is The Magical Solution. Please share, subscribe, like. Jay Allen Cross, once again, thank you so much. And this is how we grow. Have a good night, everyone.